Who does she think she is, coming here and taking our spot? That was the sentence that lingered in Amaka's ears, though it was whispered just loud enough for her to hear. She didn't turn to see who said it, she didn't need to. The tight smiles, the quick glances, and the refusal to acknowledge her success told her enough. Amaka never imagined this would be her reality when she arrived in the United States 4 years ago, a bright-eyed Nigerian student with a heart full of dreams and a suitcase bursting with hope. She had come to study nursing, determined to make her parents proud and fulfill her late grandmother's wish to bring care and dignity to those in need. But now, as she stood on stage clutching her award for graduating as the best registered nurse in her class, her heart felt heavier than the glass plaque in her hands. The journey hadn't been easy. Amaka's first day at the university in Dallas was a culture shock. The accents were different, the food tasted strange, and the loneliness weighed on her like a wet blanket. But she knew why she was there. She remembered the sacrifices her parents made to send her abroad, the late nights her father spent driving his old taxi through Lagos traffic, and her mother's constant reassurance that everything would be worth it. Her days were long and grueling. Between 12-hour clinical rotations, late-night study sessions, and the occasional tears she shed in the solitude of her dorm room, Amaka fought to prove herself. She excelled in every course, her scores often the highest in the class. But with success came resentment. At first, it was subtle. A fellow classmate accidentally excluding her from a study group. A professor questioning if she really understood the material she aced on an exam. Amaka brushed it off, focusing on her goals. But as graduation drew closer, the whispers grew louder. She probably cheated. She's not even from here. Do they even have proper hospitals where she's from? It wasn't all bad. Amaka found solace in a few kind souls, Maria, her roommate from El Paso who introduced her to Tex-Mex food, and Professor Collins, who encouraged her to never dim her light. But even their support couldn't drown out the envy that painted her as an outsider in her own moment of triumph. The award ceremony should have been a celebration of her hard work. Her name was announced, the crowd clapped politely, and she walked across the stage, her head held high. But as she turned to face the audience, she noticed the looks, some of admiration, but many of disdain. After the ceremony, a group of her classmates cornered her near the exit. One of them, a tall brunette named Ashley, folded her arms and said, "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Amaka took a deep breath. "No," she replied softly. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just work hard." "Maybe you worked too hard," another classmate sneered. Amaka's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "I worked hard because I had to. Because my family gave everything for me to be here. I didn't come to take anything away from anyone. I came to build something for myself." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and one by one, the group melted away, leaving Ashley glaring before she too walked off. Later that evening, as Amaka sat in her dorm room packing her belongings, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Maria, "You're amazing. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. They're just jealous. I'm proud of you." Amaka smiled, tears pooling in her eyes. She had faced so much culture shock, grueling academics, and the weight of being an outsider, but she had emerged stronger. The jealousy she encountered wasn't her burden to carry. She was proud of herself, and that was enough. Her parents cried tears of joy when she called to tell them about the award. "You've made us so proud, Amaka," her mother said. "Remember, the world will always try to dim a bright light, but don't stop shining." Amaka held on to those words as she began her new journey, ready to make her mark in the nursing world. She wasn't just a Nigerian student who had excelled, she was proof that resilience, determination, and a heart full of dreams could conquer even the harshest whispers. The next day, Amaka woke up early, her bags already packed, and her graduation cap resting neatly on her desk. The thought of leaving the university was bittersweet. This campus had seen her at her best and worst. It was where she learned to adapt, grow, and rise above the shadows cast by others. As she stood by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Professor Collins. Amaka, congratulations once again on your achievement. Never let anyone's insecurities make you doubt your worth. The world needs nurses like you, dedicated, compassionate, and unyielding. Keep in touch. She replied with a heartfelt thank you, knowing his encouragement had been a lifeline during her most challenging days. She slipped her phone into her pocket and made her way to the campus bus stop, ready to catch a ride to the airport. On the way, she bumped into Ashley, the same classmate who had confronted her after the ceremony. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Amaka was about to walk past, but Ashley stopped her. "Wait," Ashley said, her voice softer than before. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Amaka blinked, surprised. "Sorry? For what?" "For being mean." "I don't know. I guess I was just jealous," Ashley admitted, looking down. "You were always so focused, and everything seemed to come so easily for you. But I realize now, I didn't know your story." Amaka smiled faintly, though her heart ached at the misunderstanding. "Nothing about this journey was easy," she said. "I've struggled, just like everyone else. Maybe even more. But I learned to keep going because giving up was never an option." Ashley nodded, guilt evident on her face. "Well, I'm glad you didn't give up. You deserve everything you've achieved." "Thank you," Amaka replied, her voice steady. "And I hope you find your own success too. There's enough room for all of us to shine." As Ashley walked away, Amaka felt a strange sense of relief. For once, she didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of resentment on her shoulders. The flight back to Nigeria was long, but it gave her time to reflect. When she landed, the warm, familiar air greeted her like an old friend. Her parents were waiting at the airport, beaming with pride. Her father held a bouquet of flowers, and her mother couldn't stop hugging her. "You've made our dreams come true, Amaka," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "No, Papa," she replied, her eyes glistening. "You made this possible. I'm just the one who ran the race." Back home in Lagos, the community threw a small celebration for her. People came to congratulate her, neighbors reminiscing about her as a young girl with a book always in her hand. Children looked up at her with wide eyes, seeing her as proof that their dreams weren't out of reach. As the weeks went by, Amaka started preparing for her next chapter. She had already secured a job offer in a reputable hospital back in the US, and she was ready to begin her nursing career. But this time, she wasn't just a foreign student. She was Amaka, a strong, resilient woman who had overcome challenges and proved that success was not bound by borders or prejudices. Before she left Nigeria again, her mother sat her down. "Remember, Amaka, wherever you go, carry your values with you. Show them what it means to be a Nigerian nurse, compassionate, dedicated, and unbreakable." Amaka nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She had come so far, but her journey was just beginning. And no matter where life took her, she vowed to remain true to herself, letting her light shine brightly in a world that sometimes tried to dim it. Amaka's return to the United States marked the beginning of a new chapter. She moved to Boston to start her job at one of the city's top hospitals. The transition from student life to a professional career was daunting, but Amaka approached it with the same determination that had carried her through nursing school. Her first day at work was a whirlwind. The hospital buzzed with activity, nurses moving between patients, doctors dictating orders, and the faint hum of monitors echoing through the hallways. Amaka was assigned to the surgical unit, where she would work with a diverse team of nurses, many of whom had years of experience. But even as a newcomer, Amaka quickly stood out. She brought a sense of calm and efficiency to her work. Her assessments were thorough, her bedside manner impeccable, and her ability to connect with patients unmatched. It wasn't long before her colleagues began to notice. "She's a perfectionist," one nurse remarked, half admiring, half resentful. "She's showing the rest of us up," another grumbled. Amaka was no stranger to such comments. She kept her focus on her patients, refusing to let the murmurs of discontent distract her. Yet, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. One night during a particularly grueling shift, Amaka stayed late to help a patient recovering from a complex surgery. The patient, an elderly woman named Mrs. Bennett, was struggling to eat her dinner. Amaka sat with her, gently coaxing her to take a few bites and sharing stories about her childhood in Nigeria. "You remind me of my granddaughter," Mrs. Bennett said with a smile. "She's got that same spark in her eyes." Moments like this reminded Amaka why she had chosen nursing. For her, it wasn't just about medications and procedures, it was about bringing comfort to those in need. As months turned into years, Amaka's reputation in the hospital grew. She was promoted to charge nurse, a role that came with added responsibilities. Her ability to lead with both authority and empathy earned her the respect of her peers, even those who had once resented her. But the road wasn't entirely smooth. Some of her colleagues still found ways to undermine her. Once, during a staff meeting, a senior nurse dismissed one of Amaka's suggestions with a sarcastic comment about her limited experience. Amaka remained composed. "Experience isn't just about time," she said calmly. "It's about what you've learned and how you use it to improve patient care." Her words were met with silence, and even the doctor leading the meeting nodded in agreement. Over time, the resistance began to fade. Amaka's dedication and consistency were impossible to ignore. She made it a point to mentor new nurses, offering them the guidance she wished she'd had when she first started. She also joined the hospital's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, working to create a more welcoming environment for international staff. One day, as Amaka was leaving the hospital after a long shift, she received an unexpected call. It was from the dean of her former nursing school in Dallas. "Amaka, we've been following your career with pride," the dean said. "We'd like to invite you to give the keynote speech at this year's graduation ceremony." Amaka's breath caught. The thought of returning to the place where her journey had begun filled her with a mix of excitement and nervousness. But she accepted the invitation, knowing it was an opportunity to inspire others. When the day of the ceremony arrived, Amaka stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of graduates. She took a deep breath and began her speech. "I stand before you today as a testament to perseverance, resilience, and faith," she said. "When I arrived here years ago, I was just like you, full of dreams but uncertain of the road ahead. Along the way, I faced challenges that tested my resolve. But I learned that success isn't about being the smartest or the strongest. It's about showing up every single day and giving your best." The audience erupted in applause as Amaka finished her speech. Some of her former professors approached her afterward, praising her achievements. Even a few of her old classmates, including Maria, were there to congratulate her. As Amaka walked away from the podium, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come full circle, transforming from the girl who once doubted her place in a foreign land to a woman whose story inspired others to chase their dreams fearlessly. Her journey wasn't over, there were still challenges to face and lives to touch. But Amaka knew one thing for certain: she belonged, and no amount of whispering stares could ever take that away. After the speech, Amaka stayed back to mingle with the graduates and their families. Many of them approached her with words of admiration, their faces filled with hope. "You're an inspiration," one young woman said, her voice trembling. "I've been so afraid I wouldn't make it, but hearing your story, I know I can. Amaka smiled warmly, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. You will make it, she said firmly. The road might not be easy, but if you stay focused, you'll get there. Later, as she walked through the quiet hallways of the nursing school, memories flooded back. She paused by a bulletin board in the main corridor, where pictures of past graduates were displayed. There she was, her own photo from years ago, her face younger but just as determined. She couldn't help but feel a pang of gratitude for the version of herself who had refused to give up despite everything. Amaka's return to Boston was met with even more good news. Her hospital had selected her to participate in a new leadership program designed to prepare promising nurses for administrative roles. It was a prestigious opportunity, one that only a handful of staff members were chosen for each year. The program was intense, combining coursework with hands-on management experience. Amaka found herself sitting in board meetings, contributing to discussions about hospital policy and patient care initiatives. Though the environment was intimidating at first, she soon discovered that her clinical expertise and empathetic approach gave her a unique perspective. Her supervisors took notice. During one meeting, the hospital's chief nursing officer, a formidable woman named Linda Taylor, pulled her aside. Amaka, you're exactly what this hospital needs, Linda said. Have you ever considered going further into executive leadership? Amaka hesitated. The idea of becoming an executive seemed so far removed from the hands-on nursing she loved. I'm not sure, she admitted. I've always seen myself at the bedside, working directly with patients. Linda nodded. And that's what makes you special. Leaders who never forget the importance of patient care are the ones who make the biggest impact. Think about it. You have the potential to change more lives than you realize. Amaka left the meeting deep in thought. The idea of leadership wasn't something she'd considered before, but Linda's words planted a seed. Over the next few months, Amaka continued to thrive in her new role. She balanced her administrative responsibilities with her clinical duties, earning the respect of her colleagues and superiors alike. Her patients adored her, often leaving glowing feedback that praised her compassion and professionalism. One evening, as Amaka was wrapping up her shift, she received a phone call from a familiar voice. It was Mrs. Bennett, the elderly patient she had cared for during her early days at the hospital. Amaka, dear, I just wanted to thank you again for everything you did for me, Mrs. Bennett said. I'm doing much better now, and I tell everyone about the nurse who saved my life. Amaka's heart swelled. Mrs. Bennett, you're too kind, she replied. I'm just glad you're doing well. As she hung up the phone, Amaka realized that no matter how high she climbed, moments like these were what mattered most. Months later, she received yet another call, this time from the National Nurses Association. They were awarding her the Emerging Leader in Nursing distinction, an honor reserved for nurses who demonstrated exceptional skill, innovation, and leadership. At the award ceremony, as Amaka stood on stage accepting her plaque, she reflected on her journey. From the shy Nigerian student navigating a foreign land to a leader and advocate for change, she had come so far. She spoke briefly, her voice steady and full of conviction. This award isn't just for me. It's for every nurse who's ever doubted their place in this world. It's for every immigrant who's faced whispers and stares but kept going anyway. And it's for every patient who reminds us why we chose this path. This is for all of us. The room erupted in applause, but Amaka barely heard it. She was too busy thinking about the future, the patients she would help, the nurses she would mentor, and the lives she would touch. Her story wasn't just one of triumph, it was a testament to resilience, purpose, and the power of believing in oneself. And as she looked out at the crowd, she knew this was only the beginning. Amaka's life continued to flourish after receiving the Emerging Leader in Nursing Award. The recognition opened new doors, but it also brought new responsibilities. As her reputation grew, so did the expectations placed upon her. She was invited to speak at national conferences, write articles for medical journals, and even contribute to policy discussions on improving healthcare access for underrepresented communities. Despite her busy schedule, Amaka never let the spotlight take her away from what mattered most, her patients. She balanced her growing leadership role with her commitment to bedside care, finding joy in the small moments that reminded her why she had chosen this path. One day, an outbreak of a highly contagious respiratory virus swept through the hospital, straining its resources and staff. Amaka found herself in the thick of the crisis, working double shifts to manage the influx of patients. The surgical unit was converted into an emergency ward, and Amaka was tasked with overseeing the transition. The pressure was immense. Nurses were exhausted, tempers flared, and the weight of life and death decisions hung in the air. Amaka knew that her team needed more than just a manager, they needed a leader who could guide them through the chaos. She rallied her colleagues, implementing a system that prioritized critical cases while ensuring no patient was overlooked. She stayed on the floor, offering support and encouragement, even as she worked tirelessly alongside them. One night, as Amaka was reviewing patient charts, a junior nurse approached her, tears streaming down her face. "Amaka, I don't think I can do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "It's too much." Amaka put her arm around the nurse's shoulder and led her to a quiet corner. "I know it feels overwhelming," she said softly. "But remember why you're here. Every patient we care for, every life we save, it matters. And you're not alone, we're in this together." The nurse nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered. As the crisis abated weeks later, hospital administrators publicly praised Amaka's leadership, crediting her with keeping the unit functional during one of its most challenging periods. Her colleagues, even those who had once doubted her, began to see her not just as a peer but as a pillar of strength and inspiration. One of her patients, a middle-aged father who had been critically ill, left a heartfelt note. "Nurse Amaka, you didn't just treat my illness, you treated my soul. Your kindness gave me hope when I had none. Thank you for saving my life." That note became one of Amaka's most treasured possessions, a reminder that even in the hardest moments, her work had meaning. Months later, Amaka was approached by a non-profit organization focused on global health initiatives. They were launching a program to improve healthcare access in underserved communities in Africa and wanted Amaka to join as a consultant. The opportunity struck a chord with her. It was a chance to bring her skills back to Nigeria, helping others on a larger scale. After careful consideration, she accepted the offer, arranging to split her time between the US and Nigeria. In Nigeria, she worked tirelessly to train local healthcare workers, develop community health programs, and advocate for policy changes. Her efforts quickly gained recognition, and she became a trusted voice in both the US and African healthcare communities. Years later, Amaka stood on stage at a global health summit, addressing a crowd of world leaders, healthcare professionals, and students. She spoke passionately about the need for equity in healthcare, sharing stories of her experiences on both sides of the Atlantic. "Healthcare is a universal right," she said, her voice strong. "But it's not enough to say it, we must act. It starts with each of us, using our skills and our voices to create change." The audience erupted in applause, but Amaka's mind wandered to her beginnings. She thought of the young woman who had arrived in America with a dream and the courage to pursue it, despite the odds. After the summit, a young Nigerian student approached her. "Dr. Amaka," she began, her eyes shining, "you've shown me that it's possible to make a difference. I want to be a nurse like you someday." Amaka smiled, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You can be even greater. Remember, no matter where you start, what matters is how far you're willing to go." As the student walked away, Amaka felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had brought her to a place where she could inspire others to dream boldly and live with purpose. And she knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of her legacy.